remember going up and getting ready to express my condolences, and then looking at her face. The darkness in her eyes and the depth of sadness was just overwhelming to me.
I had just recovered a woman that had died in there, and I was on a break, and there was a gentleman out there holding on to the fence and just looking in, and he said, "Excuse me, is anybody else coming out of there? Who are you looking for?" And he goes, "My wife." And he described the woman that I had just recovered.
And it wasn't until then that I really sat down and started going back deeply into my memories and pulling out really the most painful parts.
I also remember the next day, because I had to be back at work the next morning. And it was a long line getting in, but I remember the silence in the building.
Yeah.
It was, it was just eerily quiet. And the smoke just hung in the air and just really was awful. And the soot everywhere. I still, as I said, jet fuel still.
And kerosene.
And kerosene still,
jet fuel.
Still triggers.
Yeah.
But we had to go back to work. We had work to do, and I got reassigned very quickly right after that to the Army Operations Center, where I spent many long days and many long nights.
Sure. I waited 5 years, I think, and then for some reason just sat down on a computer and started typing it out. And then I remember being really upset with certain memories that I had. The recovery of this person, and then, the recovery of these pieces of people, and then deleting everything I had written because it was too graphic. And, I wanted my child to read it one day. I found it cathartic. I still haven't finished it. I had that brief sprint 5 years after probably, and I go back to it every once in a while. But someday I'd like to finish it all and set that level of how much detail do you put in your own memories and everything. Yep. But I think it helped.
I think a lot of us held stuff in afterwards because to keep it together we had to. And I remember I didn't cry for a while. When I cried, it was at the memorial service. I went to the memorial service because my office was actually one of the people coordinating it, my former office, but I was working in the operations center by then. I remember leaving, finishing my shift, and coming and finding my friends. I said, I want to find the Lamanna family, Scott Lamanna. It was one of my son's teacher's husband, where he went to school. There, he was active duty, I was, and there was one other parent, and we were able to get word to the school that I was alive, but she kept on going back to the office asking about her husband. Has anybody heard anything? Has anybody heard anything? And then we found out he passed away. He was one of the people that died. But I remember going up and getting ready to express my condolences, and then looking at her face. And I burst into tears because the look on her face, the darkness in her eyes, and the depth of sadness was just overwhelming to me. And here I am trying to console her, tell her how sorry I am, and I'm bawling my eyes out. And we're just hugging each other, crying together.
Yeah.
And I remember Scott's father was there, and his father could never look up. His father was looking at the ground the whole time. I think so many people were in disbelief. And then I did ask her, is there anything I can do? She goes, he has some personal items. I just want to make sure I can get those back, so I have something to hold on to.
Yeah.
And I think you had one of the worst jobs of all.
I think it was all equally distributed.
It was, and because we were counting how many Humpty Dumptys we put back together every day in the Army Operations Center, and it was really got to be too emotional. After about a month or two, they started doing it in an off side report because it was affecting too many people.
Yeah.
And I remember when we had to make the decisions about burying the commingled remains.
Right.
That was another really tough decisions because we couldn't put it in a place of honor because the terrorist remains were mixed in.
Right.
And so I think the decision was made to bury it at sea. And that was a little bit of a tough decision to go through and manage that with everybody. You know,
John and I talked, and it was time actually has really no meaning. It was a couple of days into it. Rescue turned to recovery, and it was just part of the job, is what we did. And the silence, you mentioned about going to work and how silent it was.
So quiet.
When we weren't doing what we were doing, we were out trying to eat, trying to, you know, hydrate, because it was a beautiful time, but gosh, it was hot.
it was still hot. It was still summer.
And it was.
Well, and it was still hot in the building from the fire.
Fire was still burning.
The fire is still burning, yes.
Our boots melted.
Yeah.
Because the top layer had cooled, but as you
the
dug,
bottom, as we were going,
your boots would start melting. You'd see your gloves start to get soft and everything. It took probably a week for that under layer to cool down.
We'd go in for a time period and come out and just leapfrog teams at a time. And we had part of our teams were daisy chaining what we were finding and who we were finding, whatever it was. And but that was the battle rhythm of the next 3 months is what we did.
I still wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else.
Nope. Right there.
Yeah. The one recovery that really sticks with me, I'll never forget. I had just recovered a woman that had died in there, a civilian. And I was on a break to rehydrate and eat. And we had to go outside the little cordoned off area to use a restroom. And there was a gentleman out there holding on to the fence and just looking in. And he said, "Excuse me, is anybody else coming out of there?" And I said, "I'm not sure, we're still looking." This was probably day 2 or 3. He said, "Are you finding anybody alive in there?" And I said, "Well, we're still looking." "Who are you looking for?" And he goes, "My wife." And I said, "Well, what was she wearing?" And he described the woman that I had just recovered. But I couldn't tell him. I couldn't share that I knew that she was not coming out. And I just said, "Sir, if you just give me your name and number, if I hear anything, I'll give you a call." And it was an active investigation. There was nothing I could do to help the guy. But I'll never forget the look on his face. It was that dark. I know the truth here. I know the truth. But he just hung on to that fence and wouldn't let go and just looked. And he was there for days afterwards, just looking in.
I had just moved out of my own house. I was in transit getting ready to do a transfer station over to Naples, Italy. So it was a big move. And I remember having to call my realtor and tell them that I was still alive and that I was still planning to sell my house. I had to change all of my tickets. All of the travel arrangements had to be changed because I was supposed to fly out of Reagan National, and of course that had been closed. So everything changed, and it was really hard, not just for me, but for our whole office, because we didn't get to go back. Our office was one of those, it was so close that it was not habitable. And so I was only able to go back into the Pentagon 3 weeks later to get some personal effects. And, you had to put on the protective suits and zip up, and you were told not to put anything down. And it wasn't until then that I walked over to the window and saw how close we had been and the fact that we had walked away. So I was still processing all of that. When I transferred, I left the country on October 1st, and it was incredibly difficult to get on an airplane on October 1st, but I had to because this was my next duty station. And I was still processing, and I was traumatized. I was very traumatized by it. And I reported to my new command, and nobody had put together where I had just come from, or nobody knew what I had just gone through. And I felt completely alone. And I think it was 10 years later, there was a project that the National Endowment for the Arts was sponsoring, and it was about the war on terror. And so they were asking service members to submit their stories. And so I did, and they liked the story, but they wanted more detail, more detail, more detail. And it wasn't until then that I really sat down and started going back deeply into my memories and pulling out really the most painful parts.
Right.
And trying to describe them in a way that was not so graphic, but describe them in a way that people would understand what it was like to be in that moment. And so that story stayed on the National Endowment for the Arts website for the next 10 years, or 10, 11 years.
Oh, that's great.
And so a lot of people every year, they would say, hey, Susan, send me a link to your story, please. I want to share it on Facebook or whatever. And I would do that. And then 2 years ago, I was asked, and I went to look for the link, and it was gone. And I felt like my voice had been taken away. And so I sat down and I wrote the story the way I wanted to 2 years ago. 21 years later, I wrote the story the way that I wanted to write it. And I put it out on a WordPress blog site because I needed to have my voice heard, because my story isn't just about what happened to me that day. It was about the help that I saw other people give that
amazing.
day. DC came together in a way I never saw before,
Sure
and
did.
quite frankly haven't seen since then. And because I moved away just a few weeks after all of that happened, it wasn't until I moved back here a couple of years ago to take a job at MITRE that I really ended up having to face this very, very fresh for the first time, because I didn't stay and do the hard jobs like dig through the rubble piles or, some of the things that you did. I've kind of carried it on my own this whole time. And this is the first time since I left the Pentagon, I have sat down and talked with other people who were there and who did things and didn't just evacuate, but who were there and fulfilled a role because it was the thing that we were called to do that day.
And that's a thread I'm hearing as I listen to each of you is, even though you had that experience and that trauma, you all just kicked into your sense of duty, of service, and almost on autopilot, but you were still having to struggle with those experiences that you had.
It doesn't leave. And people talk about PTS. I think when you have PTS, it doesn't go away. You learn to manage. And I know for me, all those things you kind of resurrected, especially around the time I was retiring, because I lost my son right before I retired. And I know I went immediately, got help, and I said, Pandora's box opened. I said, the straw that really popped it open was losing my son, but I had to go back and really look at all these other things. And looking at all the connections and how these events impact who you are and what you do in your whole life. I know if 9/11 hadn't occurred, I'd have a very different life.
Yeah, sure.
I was getting ready to apply as a desk officer, working full-time for the DIA, and then continuing in the reserves. It would be in a very different position than I am now. And I think, again, I go back to my faith. There's a plan. I'm here for a reason, here to talk about things and do things, and there's a lot more for me to accomplish. And you take those things, and they talk about PTS and PTSG, post-traumatic growth. And I think we've all taken those experiences and we've grown with them. We've used those to continue to do good things and make a difference in the world. And we know that we're here for a purpose, and we've continued living purpose-driven lives. I think that's one of the things that I think about often.
It's great that we still have work to do here.
I know.
Why.
Yep, I still do.
That's why we're still here.
Yes.
I often think about, around September 11th, I often think about the colleagues that I did lose that day, because there were some people from the Navy who perished that day that I knew. And I have certain things that remind me of them that come up from time to time. Like, I don't know if anybody remembers the man, Jim, with the white beard who used to walk around the Pentagon and give candy out. The candy
yes,
man.
we talked about him. Yes, yes.
Yeah. When I moved, I was unpacking stuff, and in one of my jacket pockets, I found those candies that he had given me, and I just lost it.
Sorry.
Yeah, but it makes me think of the lives lost that day, and then it gives me gratitude that I and my colleagues were able to go forward from that and learn and grow and live a life. And that was something that they didn't get a chance to do.
Yep.
I remember the other thing when I was leaving the building, there was a big plane that went over the Pentagon.
Yep.
Remember that?
I do, and
And-
we actually have photos that were from that plane.
I was not sure. I didn't realize that plane was a good guy. Because when I left, I saw that big hole and I saw that plane. I said, "Oh my gosh, there's another plane coming." And there's people trying to come in the building. I know I'm trying to turn them around. Don't come in the building. And you really, that was the scariest thing for me that day was not knowing who was good and who was bad initially.
Right.
I was ready
Or
for
how
people
big
to
is
jump
the
out
attack?
of ceilings.
Right. How big is the attack?
They called a
Yes. How big is the attack?
Yeah.
Who was good and who was
That's
bad?
exactly right.
You know, I didn't. When we were leaving, I didn't know if I was going to be walking and having people shoot at me.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I was scared a few times that day. I wasn't scared until we got to the courtyard and they told us to evacuate the courtyard because there was another plane coming in and they didn't know its intentions. And that is the most scared I had ever been in my life up until that point. And then when we set up on the banks out by the river entrance for the second triage site, they told us to stay underneath the cover of trees because we didn't know what to expect. And that I truly felt like I was in a war zone in that moment.
Yep.
And then fighting to get the woman that we were trying to save to the hospital. It was like a war zone in and of itself because people didn't know what was going on. People didn't know what was happening, and traffic was just completely stopped. And when you're in a beaten up old Subaru, you look like everybody else.
Right.
And so the only way to get through the traffic was to run car to car, banging on doors, telling people to get out of the way so that we could get this woman to the hospital. And I, several times past, I have wondered if I made the right decisions that day. If I had gone a different way down a different corridor, would I have made a different decision? Would I have impacted a different life? I did. I found out a year later that the woman that we had helped to get to the hospital, she did survive.
Great.
And she was an Army lieutenant colonel, and she was a mother. And so I figured that if I didn't help save anybody else that day, there was one life with 2 more lives attached to it that depended on her. And, you know, it doesn't make sense to second guess yourself that much when you've got at least that to say, yes, that's something that went well that
did.
day.
It sure did.
Never up to that point in my career had I had to worry truly. Acquisition effort, we don't deploy. Or we didn't deploy up to that point, right? Post 9/11, there's a whole new world, especially on the Air Force side. And I have deployed since, and I have been game on ever since then, but totally oblivious. Everybody was a good guy, gal to me, and how are we taking care of the families? So I'm thankful that y'all were on watch. Well, so we didn't have to have that piece on our brains. We could just stay focused on the families and taking
Also
care
the
of
most critical part. So thank you for doing that.
Well, and the other thing is, I think the jets that scrambled that day, one of the pilots was a female pilot. I think one of them or both were, but they didn't have any weapons in their plane. And if that plane that crashed in Pennsylvania got close enough to DC, these people had already made a decision to fly into it and
stop
make it
it.
crash.
Yep.
So it didn't hit the capital area. And I actually have when we have later on, we can share a picture of it. I have a painting of it.
One of the things you said, Rob, was that, we still have work to do today. I heard you say that. So it strikes me that, an experience of this magnitude, how formative that must be in every aspect of your life, your personal relationships, your professional work, your career decisions. And it's decades later now, but what are some of the things that you think have been most formative out of that?
I think the phrase "not on my watch." I thought when I retired from the Air Force, I was handing over, I don't want to say end of watch because that's a trigger for a different day, but, I thought I was done, comes off your shoulders, and now I can do this, post-retirement world. And no, I think the watch will continue all the way through my life. And any kind of a crisis where I think I can jump in, I'm in, and just let me know where you need me. I may not be the health professional or the fighter pilot, but I got 2 of these, 1 of these, and I'm just here to help.
That's great.
Yeah.
And no matter what you were able to do, on that day and the days after, everybody came together in a way that I haven't seen since.
Yes.
But and would not give up. The sheer anger and the knowledge that you had to step up and handle this, there was no other option. It had to be done. But I remain struck by that sensation of looking around at my brothers and sisters out there and just thinking, this is good to be American. This is what it's about. In our worst moment, this is what it looks like. It's awesome.
And it wasn't just America, because it was, NATO came together as a result of that too.
Sure did.
I feel very similarly to what you just stated, in that it really was about coming together. There was no politics that day.
Nope.
There was no rank that day. There was no anything other than, what can I do to help you? And the world came together for a small period of time with the United States. So for me, one of the biggest takeaways that I have from September 11th is that that's possible. That very differently minded people who come from completely different backgrounds, completely different upbringings, environments, can agree and work together to get things done. And so that aspect of teamwork and working together, it's possible. It's just, I think we get very mired in our own personal views sometimes, and understandably so. And it takes some horrific, earth-shattering experience to remind us that at the end of the day, we're all human. And we are all just living our lives. We have families, loved ones. We want to live. We want to be healthy. We want to breathe. We want to share good times. We're all human. And that is one of the things that reminded me of that I was reminded of on that day, that we could come together as a one in that moment.
Do you guys remember, like, the first time you heard the national anthem after 9/11? Was that not? Mine was the following weekend. We had tickets, theater tickets. And so sure enough, they played the anthem, and standing ovations and tears. And I think it was, again, one of those first times where civilian Debbie in a civilian audience, didn't matter who you were sitting next to, we were all together, and we were so proud to be Americans, and we were going to get through this together.
The day they had the flag draped over the Pentagon, the famous picture we've all got pictures of and all, our teams were standing underneath the flag. That was also the day the president came to visit the Pentagon. That's the day he came. And that hit.
Not a dry eye in that crowd.
That hit hard. Everybody. We got a bunch of, type A personality guys and gals out there, and just, yeah, we were all just crumbled.
Yep.
Well, at some point you have to. Like I said, when I went to the memorial service, I hadn't cried, and you look at somebody, and it's that small trigger that just opens the floodgates.
Sure.
And go. My 10-year-olds, Daddy, you were there. I said, yeah, I was there. And that generation where they're 10 and they're now learning in class, American history and that. And I'm severely blessed to be able to take them to these locations, not just there, but all around DC, but to the Pentagon and show them. And I remember telling them like what it was like that day, because they see the pictures that I have, and they look at me and goes, yeah, where was that? And I'm like, well, that was right here. That's my dealing with it.